Hey everybody, environmentalism is of course the hot topic right now. We have the Biden administration rejoining the Paris Agreement. We've got a basically a war on American energy production, and supposedly this is going to save us from global warming. Well, today we have a wonderful man to discuss this topic with us. He probably knows more about this than anybody I can think of. His name is Dr. Cal Beisner. He is the founder of the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. It's a network of scientists, theologians, and scholars who are trying to educate the people about biblical earth stewardship, economic development for the poor, and of course, proclaiming and defending the good news of salvation by God's grace received through faith in Jesus Christ's death and resurrection. Cal, thank you so much for being with us today.
Alex, thanks very much for having me on the show. Really appreciate the opportunity.
It's great to have you, and I've been a big fan of your work for a long time. And we were both at the UN Climate Summit in 2009 in Copenhagen, and that was a fun experience, fun and strange all at the same time. Dr. Beiser,
Yeah,
tell us about this climate issue because during the Trump years, it seemed like it had kind of faded to the back burner. I mean, you'd still hear
yeah.
about it here and there, but what's going on now with the Paris Agreement? Is this climate crisis a real crisis that we need to have a Paris Agreement to save us from?
Yeah, I think one of the best things to understand about the climate alarmist movement is what you and I both would have witnessed in Copenhagen back in 2009. There were thousands and thousands of protesters there, marching around with various signs. One of the biggest groups there was an international socialist organization. Another was the Socialist Youth Organization. And the most common sign that I saw there was system change, not climate change. So it's pretty clear that what's really the motivating factor in this is an anti-capitalistic, anti-free market, frankly, anti-private property sort of a mentality, and that's pretty obviously revealed, for example, in the comment by Edenhofer. I'm trying to think of his first name. He was a co-chair of the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and Ottmar Edenhofer, German economist, said in the lead up to the Cancun climate summit that people must not think that this is an environmental summit. This has little to do with the environment, little to do with climate. This is all about de facto redistributing the world's wealth. And when you add to that Cristina Figueres, who was at the time the chairman of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, saying that the Paris Agreement, which at that point was pending, was the first opportunity we have to completely redefine the global economic system, then you realize this is really not much about climate at all. And that makes sense because, frankly, the real world observations on climate show us that there is no crisis at all. Uh, yeah, we've had about a degree, maybe a degree and a half Celsius of warming since the mid 19th century. It's really good that we have too, because it meant that we came out of a little ice age during which crops failed all over the world. There were serious problems for humanity as well as for other life. And the world just always does better in warmer times. So this has been good. All the claims of increased frequency and intensity of severe weather events like hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, droughts, wildfires. Uh, the the claims are all based on computer models of how the climate system works. They're not confirmed by real world observations. The empirical evidence is that there's been no increase in the frequency or intensity of any of those things. And the real world observations tell us that the models, on average, simulate or project 2 to 3 times as much warming as actually observed over the relevant period, which means, frankly, that they are falsified and they provide no rational basis for any predictions of future global climate or any policies having to do with it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. After going to these UN climate summits for over a decade,
Yeah,
that same agenda just became so apparent. You see your actual revolutionists out in the street chanting about how we need to bring
yeah,
down capitalism. It seems to have very little to do with the climate. One of the other things I noticed, and this becomes apparent to me at all of these UN climate summits, but in 2012, something really jumped out at me. You mentioned Cristiana Figueres of Costa
yes,
Rica. She opened up the climate summit in Cancun with a prayer to the ancient
yeah,
Mayan jaguar goddess Ixchel. And she said this was the goddess of creativity. And so hopefully, this Mayan goddess of creativity is going to help us weave a wonderful tapestry to save the world from global warming. I quickly, I typed into my computer Ixchel, and the first thing that popped up was actually this is the Mayan goddess of the moon, reason, human sacrifice, war, and cannibalism. And so we're
yeah.
praying to this really bizarre figure to help us save the climate. Is there some sort of significance to that, or was it just a mishap at the UN?
No, I think it's very significant. I mean, if you look at the arc idea of the UN, can't remember now exactly what they call it, but they have this idea of an arc of the covenant going around the world with displays about environmentalism. All of it is as pagan as can possibly be imagined. They're reviving ancient pagan religions. This is fundamentally an anti-Christian thing, as well as an anti-capitalist or anti-private property thing, which is not surprising that those two would be linked, because biblical Christianity, founding its ethics in the Ten Commandments, includes the commandment, "You shall not steal." And if you shall not steal, that means people have a right to their private property not being stolen. But you mentioned the Paris Agreement, and I'd just like to real quickly mention just two facts that people really need to know about the Paris Agreement. These are the only facts you really need to know. The first fact is, how much will it cost for the world to implement this from now to the end of the century? Bjorn Lomborg calculated that, taking for granted all the assumptions of the architects of the Paris Agreement. So he wasn't challenging, he was being generous to them. And he answered $1 to $2 trillion a year. That is 70 to 140 trillion dollars over the century. And then the second question is, how much warming would be prevented? And again, uh, uh, Lomborg did the calculations, accepting all of the assumptions of the people who supported the Paris Agreement. It was not critical at all. It was just working with their own assumptions. And the answer was 0.3 of a degree Fahrenheit of temperature reduction, global average temperature in the year 2100. That works out to 23.3 to 46.6 trillion dollars per tenth of a degree temperature reduction. We can't even measure 0.3 of a degree Fahrenheit global average temperature. It's too small to have any impact on any ecosystem or on any human well-being. And it's not surprising that the author of the book, The Art of the Deal, thought that was a bad deal. Still is.
Yeah, it really was incredible. And when I looked into the text of the Paris Agreement, actually, I was in Paris when they were negotiating this monstrosity. And the thing that really jumped out at me is that under the Paris Agreement, the communist Chinese, who are already releasing more CO2 emissions than any other nation on the planet, and I don't begrudge
Yep.
them that. Let them release CO2. It's good for the
Sure.
plants.
CO2 is
I
great
don't
stuff.
begrudge them. Yeah, absolutely. And that's what Trump's climate advisor said. We interviewed Dr. Will Happer. He said the Earth is starving
Yeah.
for more CO2. But here these guys are running around with their heads on fire telling us that CO2 is going to kill the planet. Except apparently, communist Chinese CO2 is not a big deal. Under the Paris Agreement, they said we're going to
Right.
continue increasing our CO2 emissions for maybe 10, 15 years until 2030. Then we'll consider peaking our emissions. Meanwhile, America is expected to dismantle its economy to pursue a
Yeah.
28% reduction in a period of 5 years. It's just
Yeah.
unbelievable. We have to go to a break in just a moment here, Cal. But when we get back, I want to talk some about the biblical view on these things because we've established, I think, pretty clearly that this is not about saving the planet from climate change. But Christians do have, I think, a real serious interest in protecting the environment and in being good stewards of the earth. God put it here for us.
Absolutely.
And so when we get back from the break, I want to go over that a little bit with you and have you kind of get into the biblical rationale behind protecting the planet and really how that would look from a Christian perspective rather than dismantling our industries and praying to
Great.
Ixchel. So thank you very much. We'll pick it up here in just a moment on the other side of the break. Stay tuned, folks. Hey everybody, Alex Newman here with the New American again. Thank you for staying with us. Today we have a phenomenal guest, Cal Beisner, the founder of the Cornwall Alliance. And before we went to break, we were talking about the UN's climate agenda. We've both been to some of these summits. We've been following this issue closely. But Cal's real area of expertise, aside from these issues, is what the Bible says about these critical issues. And I think that's a subject that really is incredibly important for Christians to be thinking about. So, Cal, would you tell us what is God's view on taking care of the environment and being good stewards of the planet?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I've fleshed this out in several different books, Prospects for Growth, A Biblical View of Population Resources in the Future, my book, Where Garden Meets Wilderness, Evangelical Entry into the Environmental Debate, and then more recently, a couple of books. One is called Is Capitalism Bad for the Environment? And the other is Creation Care or Creation Stewardship, evaluating uh, competing views. All of these, by the way, are available from the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation at cornwallalliance.org. Uh, we could spend hours talking about this, but I think I can sort of sum it up this way. Uh, when God had created Adam and Eve in his own image, male and female, he blessed them and said to them in Genesis 1:28, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and everything that moves on the face of the earth. So dominion is what we are called to do. The fact that we fell into sin doesn't mean we lose that responsibility. We still have it, but it gets tougher. And we need first to be reconciled to God through Christ so that we can begin to think God's thoughts after him. Our thoughts need to be made captive to the obedience of Christ, as Paul puts it in 2 Corinthians 10:5. Well, back in 1967, the historian Lynn White Jr. wrote an essay on the religious roots of our ecological crisis that became very famous, was republished in hundreds of anthologies and studied by thousands of environmental science students over the years. White claimed that Genesis 1:28, with its dominion mandate, was the excuse for Judeo-Christian thought to say what people are called to do is just to treat the earth any way we jolly well please, exploit it, rape it, abuse it. We don't have to do anything special to take care of it. That, of course, was a complete caricature. You can't find any rabbinic or Christian commentary that holds that kind of a view. But unfortunately, it's widespread among environmentalists. Instead, what we do is we look at that verse in its context. And if we're made in God's image and then told to have dominion, we should be looking at what God did, using his actions as the example. And what we find in Genesis 1 is, in the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth. So he started with nothing and he got everything. That's pretty good. Then he brought light out of darkness. He brought order out of chaos. He brought life out of non-life. He brought great abundance and variety of life. And he told every variety to be fruitful and multiply and fill its niche in the earth. So at the Cornwall Alliance, we have looked at that and said, okay, this is what godly dominion looks like. It is men and women created in God's image, working lovingly together to enhance the fruitfulness and the beauty and the safety of the earth to the glory of God and to the benefit of our neighbors. So that we're really addressing the two great commandments there. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. This is what we consider to be real creation stewardship. And it does mean that we're supposed to actually subdue and rule the creation. We don't just keep it the way we find it. It is not true that nature knows best or that nature is best untouched by human hands. We needn't be concerned about our carbon footprint or our environmental impact or something like that in terms of trying to minimize it. Instead, we should be concerned about trying to make sure that our impact, our influence is to the good, not to the evil. The size of it is not the issue, though environmentalists generally think that human beings should make as little impact on the earth as possible.
Yeah, those same things come to mind. I see kind of an effort to reverse all the things that God commanded at these UN climate summits. For
Yeah,
example, I was in Madrid last year, and all these people are walking around openly saying we need less people on the planet. You need to stop having
yep,
babies. I mean, they told me this to my face on camera.
yeah.
You need to stop having babies. I got 5 babies. God said be fruitful and
I
multiply.
had 7.
Praise God. That's wonderful. And see, that's what God tells us to do. And then you see, for example, that God told us to have dominion over the earth, and yet at these UN summits you almost get the feeling that the earth was made for its own sake, or not made, and that we just kind of get to exist and the earth gets to have dominion over us. It really seems
Yeah.
like a total reversal. So what does biblical stewardship look like in terms of policy? If a government wanted to have kind of a biblically consistent environmental policy, would it look more like what the UN is promoting? What is there any country that kind of follows that approach well? What would it look like?
Well, if you the way you ended that question, is there any country that it looks like? You want to look for the countries that have the cleanest, the healthiest, the most beautiful environments. And what we know from history, and I discuss this at length in my book, Is Capitalism Bad for the Environment? Is that the more socialistic a country is, the dirtier its environment is going to be. And the more free market oriented, capitalistic, private property rooted it is, the cleaner and more beautiful its environment is going to be. That's the lessons of history. It's not a matter of theory. That's what we learn from looking at the actual history of the nations. And I go through that at some length in that book. Um, you know, there's a simple reason behind that. It's the very same reason that you find graffiti on public bathroom walls and not on your private bathroom wall in your home. It's because when you own it, you have an incentive to take good care of it. When nobody owns it, nobody has any incentive to take good care of it. So, private property rights are really the foundation of good environmental stewardship. Where we have strong private property rights, we're going to have good, clean, healthful, beautiful environments. And a part of the reason for that is that with strong private property rights also comes the building of wealth. It's very obvious that capitalistic countries create more wealth and put it into more hands than socialistic countries. And a clean, healthful, beautiful environment is a costly good. So, like any other costly good, wealthier people can afford more of it. So, that's sort of the beginning. Now, we could go on to all sorts of details, but obviously time doesn't permit that. But if we start with that basic foundation, I think we can't go wrong.
Yeah, I teach to my economics students. We look at the countries that are more free market minded and those that are less free market minded, and you can plot GDP per capita,
Yeah,
and there's a very clear trend. The
absolutely.
wealthy you are, the freer you are, almost in every case. Dr. Beisner, we've only got less than 2 minutes left, but I was hoping you could give us some final words of wisdom and also tell us where people can learn more. I mean, we could talk about this for months. It's just so fascinating. Where can people go to learn more about what the Bible says on these issues and all these topics?
Well, to learn more, I basically invite people to come to cornwallalliance.org. We have hundreds of articles and major papers, and we have a bookstore, online bookstore, and DVDs full of good resources. We also have a page on Facebook, Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation, and a YouTube channel, Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. We've got lots of good teaching videos on those. We have a live stream on Tuesday nights on Facebook and YouTube alike, and we get good guests there. From now to the end of this month, we are offering a special resource called Impacts of Climate Change, Perception and Reality. And this is a tremendous booklet, and it refutes the notion that we're in the midst of climate crisis. And if people will go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, and make a donation of literally any size, no matter how small, when they request that as our way of saying thanks, we'll be glad to send them a free copy of that booklet.
Phenomenal. Well, Dr. Beisner, thank you so much for your work. Thank you for spending some time with us. Folks, go to cornwallalliance.org and check it out. They know what they're talking about. These are critical issues. You know it if you're a regular reader, a regular viewer, a regular listener at the New American. Thank you, folks, so much. Thanks again, Cal, and God bless you all.